Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for this special event. We are pleased to welcome you to the Voices of Care Summit, a national schizophrenia caregiver experience. I am Amira Bilal, Vice President of Programs and Policy here at Caregiver Action Network. This event has been made possible with support from our friends at Bristol Myers Squibb and Teva Pharmaceuticals. Voices of Care is a first of its kind virtual summit bringing together family caregivers, advocates, mental health leaders, and nationally recognized storytellers for an honest, hopeful conversation about caring for someone living with schizophrenia. This event is designed to be interactive, not just another webinar. This national event creates a safe space for caregivers to learn directly from one another through lived experience, practical conversations, and meaningful connection. Whether your loved one was recently diagnosed or you've been caregiving for years, you'll leave with new perspectives, greater confidence, and a community that understands. Today, we are excited to bring awareness to the challenges and triumphs of providing care to loved ones facing this diagnosis. First, we will hear from our Chief Executive Officer, Marvell Adams Jr., as he navigates a lively interview with our featured speaker, Atsuko Okatsuka, a comedian and Hallmark talent who also has deep experience in supporting her mother with schizophrenia. You are encouraged to use the chat and Q&A features located in your Zoom toolbar along the bottom of your screen to share comments or ask questions, and we will acknowledge them later in the program.
Can you tell us a little something about your connection to caregiving? Who you care for and what that role, how that role became a part of your life.
Yes, yeah. So caregiving, I didn't have the term, I didn't know the term growing up, as a kid in LA, as an immigrant, or even when I was in Japan or Taiwan. Because sometimes you don't have the vocabulary words, but once I realized what it was, I was like, oh, my grandma has been doing that kind of all her life with being a mother to my mother who has mental illnesses and also seizures too, a few times a week. And so I had seen her look after my mom. And then when my grandma raised me, right, I was like, oh, okay. And then as my mom and grandma with age got older, that's when I started taking on the role too. But yeah, it took a long time for me to figure out that's what that word means. And yeah. And so, of course, with age, yeah, my grandma's 92 now and my mom's 72. So that's
Yeah.
when I started taking things on. And everything had to be perfectly aligned too. Like my career sort of, took off in a way where I could also financially support them now too. So yeah, it was kind of perfectly.
Yeah. I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's like this, strangely enough, especially in America, we're trying to think of ways to create what you had, which is intergenerational caregiving, where there are supports, not just the daughter, not just the mom, caring, but that it's intergenerational. But you, as you mentioned, your grandmother raising you, what is what does that mean to you? Like, how did she shape who you are, particularly in the context of seeing her support and care for your mom and make decisions to perhaps make your mom's life better and easier as she navigates schizophrenia, but also really being a support to you?
Yeah, I'm realizing it's a lot of improvising. And so I think like support systems really matter because you go, am I doing this right?
Hmm.
And there's a lot of decisions my grandma made as a caregiver and as like gosh, she raised me and then she was also looking after my mom. She really improvised and there were some wild decisions, where I not to judge, but also at the time, being like, are you sure we're gonna just pick up and move to America suddenly and live in my uncle's garage from Japan? Japan's got free healthcare and or not free healthcare, but it's like very affordable. The
Uh-huh.
roads are nice, and you know, and also we know the culture here, we know the language here. So there's a lot of decisions that I realize it's a lot of times hard for the caregiver to make, but they have to think quick because,
Hmm.
things might seem like they're falling apart and spiraling. My mom's uh, mental illness was, like uh, she was spiraling hard when she
Yeah.
was in Japan, and my grandma had to make a decision quick to get more support somehow.
Hmm.
And so, um, yeah, but I'm learning it's a lot of making it up as you go.
Yeah.
Uh,
Hmm.
yeah. So, and I do that too now, is what I'm realizing. Yeah, and then
Well,
for kind of aggressive generosity, I do that too because of my grandma.
aggressive generosity. Please say more about that. Aggressive generosity. I love that.
Well, it's like being like, Grandma, you deserve to take a soak and a bath just like anybody else. So I've prepared this nice, soaking time, and I'm
Hmm.
gonna get in there with you. And she'll be like, No, I don't really, no, I don't need that. And I'm like, Grandma, you silly girl. So it's like, or it's like when, growing up, like your family tells you to eat, right? Or like forcing you to eat, and you're like, no, 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 I'm good. And that kind of aggressive generosity, trying to get ahead of, your loved one being hungry, or your loved one needing a bath or a nice spa day, because you've created in your head that maybe they are, sadder than they actually are, or which is what I do anyway. So I've seen my grandma do that, right, where she's like, we're going to move to America, and me and my mom were like, no, we don't need to do that. And she's like, no, 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 you deserve
Yeah.
this. That's aggressive generosity, and I've
I
learned
love
that
that.
from my grandma.
No, that's so perfect. I mean, like we talk about a lot of self-care, when it comes to caregivers and making sure that they really look after themselves. But like the
Mm,
way you just posed it, it really does allow those around the caregiver to say, I'm on you, and like I'm going to ensure that this generosity meets you where you are, and ensuring that you have what you need, like a nice bubble bath with or without you in it with them. I mean, like
mhm,
that's spectacular. I mean, but also to think about, I can imagine in your grandma's head to juxtapose to compare being in Japan and really describing what sounds like a harder situation, harder healthcare access, a garage versus the home you had in Japan, and recognizing that that still led to a need to move. So, when
mhm.
you grew up, your mom was referred to as being, sick, and that was the word that your grandmother gave it. But, what was it like carrying so much of that? Because that's kind of that's an adult thing that many times, many kids do navigate nowadays as younger caregivers. But, I think it was you were 8 when you came to the States.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
what was that like for you having such I guess, a big conversation and like kind of a responsibility that you were really a caregiving youth as well?
Oh gosh, I think as a kid I didn't know if, I was afraid of my mom, so I didn't really. I don't
Hmm.
know if I was like caregiving for her. My grandma definitely was doing more of that. And because I was afraid of her, like you said, she was generally sick, is what I knew, but I didn't know with what. I knew she wasn't like other people's moms because I
Hmm.
saw other people's moms, and I was like, oh, the other moms are picking up, her kids from school, or cooking, or like, or I would have play dates at my classmates' homes, and the mom would be the one being like, "Do you guys want snacks?" I was like, "Oh, my mom's not like that," so I knew that, but yeah, I think it's easier to be afraid of something you don't know what's going on, and I think not knowing what her diagnosis was, things
Yeah.
like this, or knowing that other people also had moms like this somewhere in the world would have
Hmm.
probably helped, but um I had, yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't, yeah, I didn't know.
There's this loneliness that comes along with that of like feeling isolated at times because the situation you don't see people talking about, or there's like no sticker of like, oh, my mom has schizophrenia, or my mom lives with bipolar disorder, depression. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's not a community that's built, that's fit for it. But I will say, I mean, and this is maybe knowing too much about your history, but I mean, talk about you entertained your mom a fair amount. I mean, like the if I
Oh,
think there was
yeah.
some sort of statistic out there, the number of comedians that came into their own as a result of trying to cheer up their parents or cheer up the people in their life. Could you talk a little bit about like what was that like for you, like being this source of entertainment and trying to really support your mom by being that source of joy for her?
Yeah, that's true. You reminded me of that. Yeah, because I was like, oh, I didn't do anything. I just stayed away from her. But there were times where I would play with her, and we would like fight off the demons or whatever. And I would take like a wand. It was like a Sailor Moon wand toy I had, and I would give it to her, and then I would take like a different stick from the house, whether it was like chopsticks or like a back scratcher, and then we would use that to like ward off the bad spirits. And we would be very theatrical. We love a classic good guy versus bad guy story. I still love those till this day. I think that's why I like a lot of Disney movies and stuff, because it's very clear when the good guy has won. And so
Yes.
yeah, I was always trying to do that for my mom. And um yeah, and you know sometimes I would like sing in front of her and dance. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty amazing the skill sets that we get from that are passed down to us, but how we manifest them, differently in ourselves and in our career. I mean, I grew up in a household where I was a caregiving youth for my mom. She had a
Mm,
stroke when I was in my teens, and my dad was there as well. But like, we grew up poor, and so if my dad didn't go to work, he didn't get paid, and so
mm-hmm,
I was the one. I think it was during the summertime, and so I pretty much spent my summer helping my mom around the house, doing whatever. And so by the time I was in college, I was teaching my college roommates how to do laundry and like all this other stuff because
mm,
they never knew how to do it. And it shocked me that like you don't know how to do laundry. Like your parents did it for you. I'm like, that's makes no sense to me
mm,
because like by the time I was a freshman in high school, like I grocery shopped for myself, I did my laundry, I cooked most of the meals for myself because after my mom recovered, she started working a second job, like working two jobs, and so her days and evenings were pretty truncated. Um,
right.
but like the medical reality is such a omnipresent thing. When you have someone with a chronic condition, for her, it was an episodic thing that she recovered from. But many times
Mm,
when caregivers of individuals with mental health conditions, it like for your grandma, it's a lifelong caregiving role that families face. And so through that time, there's so many decisions to make and there's so many trade-offs. And I heard you mention about, your mom having seizures at time, but then also the medication to treat her schizophrenia partially canceled out the seizure medication. And so having to make these tough decisions, you know, in for caregivers, watching this story right now, what does it feel like to have that type of decision before you and having to really make a decision between, one outcome systematic approach for helping your mom versus another one, and neither one is a perfect situation.
yeah, for sure. It's hard because you want to talk with the person about what they prefer to, instead of
Mhm.
making decisions for them. So that's where we can get stuck a lot too. But so like, for example, trying to figure out next steps for my mom right now. It's like we always try to talk it out with her.
Yeah.
Um, my grandma's went back in the hospital recently, and then so she's in a care facility right now where she's getting rehabilitation because she had a fall. And
Hmm.
then so my mom is at the place they were living at together, alone, and she refuses to leave there. But I'm trying to get her closer to me and my husband. There's a
Hmm.
place that opened up right in front of our place, and we're like, we can put you there. And so it's like we want to give her like autonomy and then the decision making stuff, but it's hard when the person refuses and it's like, oh, I'm not going to do anything, I'm not going to move, and it's like, oh, but we care about your safety, things like this. And so luckily, with having to choose whether to treat the seizures or the psychoses,
Hmm.
my mom was down with trying to treat the seizures first. Also, my mom was more down to admit she gets seizures more than the fact that she may have something as scary sounding as paranoid schizophrenia. You know what I mean? So that kind of worked out
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's very case by case with these decisions you have to make as a family. But
Exactly.
yeah, that
Yeah.
just worked out that way. Yeah, where she was like, I don't have schizophrenia. Seizures, yes. And it's like, okay, so let's treat
Let's treat
that.
this
Because
seizures. Yes.
yeah, it just sucks that the stigma itself made it, stigma against mental illnesses made it so that she was down to get the epilepsy treatments
Yeah.
more.
I mean, we talk about
Anyway.
that and even train caregivers on shared decision making of like understanding that it is a very different balance of like meeting the person where they are, them understanding what the pros and cons are, but also end of the day, I mean, everybody wants to have control over their life, no matter what's going on with you, physically, mentally, spiritually, and how to find ways to help your loved one have some control. Like, okay, mom, you got to move to this place, but we can find ways to decorate your room or when you visit or when like to find ways to be able to give them that still sense of agency because they feel like they're losing something and it's really hard to kind of respond to that when well, but you're going to lose a lot more if you're like 40 miles away from us, like as opposed to across the street.
Mm-hmm. Yes, totally. Yeah. So it's that balance I'm still figuring out. How much
Hmm.
to ask her things, how much to try to make a decision for her. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. Well, the one last thing I wanted to ask you, and then appreciate just how much you've shared so much today is that, what's one way that you've learned to care for yourself?
Mm. Yes, yeah. Maybe the toughest question, maybe, and the love one I had
Hmm.
a hard time answering too. Is this trivia?
This is the
I'm a,
hard hitting part of the thing, yeah. And then we're gonna have a quiz on geography.
that I'll really fail, but I'll
Fair
fail.
enough.
But um,
It's the most
so
awkward one for most because it is the
oh
one
yeah,
I'll tell you I always ask at the end because it's tough. It is so because we're not even taught we're supposed to learn how to care for ourselves. Like we have to be reminded. But what
right,
what
right.
what have you learned? How have you learned, or one way you've learned to care for yourself?
Yes, I think it's like trying to not get to a burnout before you start to do that, because that's when I started to self-care. More recently is when I kind of felt like when I crashed and burned. I literally couldn't. I was like, oh, like I couldn't. I just was like I couldn't even think anymore, and I could barely like form a form a creative thought, or I was
Yeah.
just so stuck, and I was just so tired, and I was just like, you know, yeah,
Hmm.
grumpy. And I just was like, I don't even want to, like, I think I hit kind of a depression or something too. And I was getting sick
Yeah.
physically a lot, like getting colds a lot. And my husband was like, hey, like, let's figure out a way to, once I got out of that, he's like,
Hmm.
let's figure out a way to, you know, free your mind and free it's I think yeah, the freeing of the mind is the self-care that he kind of
Yeah.
reminded me to do, which is like play a little bit or taking a little walk or you know um, listening to music for me. Oh my gosh,
No Beatles, right?
listening to songs I like.
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
and so preventatives in a way. Yeah,
yeah.
so remembering to do that, even if it's like 15 minutes for the day, in the day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Wow. Well, I'm glad you have that ability and that that person also in your life and Ryan reminding you. So Atsuko, thank you so much for taking the time today. We really appreciate it. I can tell you there's so many caregivers that are watching this that not only are nodding their heads and relating to you, but also really getting a shot in the arm to laugh and really maybe be one step away from, being burnt out and maybe keeping that at bay. So thank you so much for continuing to tell your story.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. And I'll see you in DC.
Yay!
Yay.
Cool.
Lots of love. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. What a delightful interview. Kudos to Marvell and Atsuko for a thoughtful and engaging exchange. Our audience has been great in the chat as well, and so we're glad you enjoyed it. Mental health can be difficult to talk about, from not quite knowing or understanding the different disorders that one could be experiencing, to navigating issues of context and even culture when discussing the challenges of treatment and support. For those who are gathered today, we are highlighting schizophrenia, which interferes with a person's ability to think clearly. And we're live. We are highlighting schizophrenia, which interferes with a person's ability to think clearly, manage emotions, make decisions, and relate to others. Schizophrenia also causes people to lose touch with reality, often in the form of hallucinations and delusions. Voices of Care is a first of its kind virtual summit bringing together family caregivers, advocates, mental health leaders, and nationally recognized storytellers for an honest, hopeful conversation about, excuse me, about caring for someone living with schizophrenia. Through this initiative, CAN is helping caregivers of individuals living with schizophrenia to build knowledge, reduce stigma, and strengthen connections through lived experience and community learning. We are committed to uplifting caregivers who may be facing significant challenges in caring for loved ones with this disease. Even as we seek to treat the primary issue, other health concerns and conditions can emerge. And we see that too. Caregiving is not flat, it is fluid. Caregivers do well to remain flexible in securing the best outcomes, not only for their family and friends, but for themselves too. You are not alone, and we hope that you feel seen and will feel supported in your journey. I'm excited to move on to our next feature as we create texture and add depth to the schizophrenia caregiver experience. Slide. Again, today's activities are made possible with support from our friends, Bristol Myers Squibb and Teva Pharmaceuticals. Next. As an overview to the events agenda, we've already opened with our featured conversation with Atsuko Okatsuka. Now we will move into a fireside chat with author and screenwriter Sarah Labrie, and then we'll move into our caregiver peer learning panel. Finally, we will process takeaways and group reflections, and then provide you with a caregiver resource roundup in support of your caregiving journey. Then we will close and let you know what's next for CAN and what's next for Voices of Care. Slide. It's me. I'm your host, Amira Bilal. I serve as Vice President of Programs and Policy for Caregiver Action Network. As we move into the next feature, you are encouraged to use the chat and Q&A features located in your Zoom toolbar along the bottom of your screen to share comments or ask questions, and we will acknowledge them later in the program. Slide. This spring, Caregiver Action Network secured the opportunity to participate in the ATX Television and Film Festival, a one-of-the-kind festival experience bringing TV fans and industry together to celebrate their favorite moments in television as one community. Held in Austin, Texas, we went to this decidedly non-healthcare space because so many of us infer real lived experience from story. And this storytelling is central to the television shows and films that reflect our day-to-day lives. Our panel, entitled From One Day at a Time to Friday Night Lights, Care and Context, brought together an incredible group of storytellers, including Brent Miller from One Day at a Time and Clean Slate, David Hudgens from Friday Night Lights and Parenthood, Jeffrey Addis and Will Matthews from The Burrows, and Kate Fulp from the Hollywood Health and Society Institute at the University of Southern California. Together, we explored how television helps audiences recognize caregiving experiences in their own lives. With millions of Americans serving as family caregivers, authentic storytelling can help caregivers feel seen, understood, and connected to support. Enter Sarah Labrie. Sarah crossed our path at our ATX reception, where remarks were delivered on the vital role entertainment can play in elevating caregiving stories. And having her with us today is exactly that, elevation. Sarah is a screenwriter and an author of the book, No One Gets to Fall Apart, which highlights her journey along with her mother and family as a mental health caregiver. We were overjoyed at the immediate connection we shared with Sarah in that space and are honored to create this space to hear more about her art and her life. Sarah, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
No problem. We're happy to have you, and thank you so much for sharing the time today. We met at the ATX Television and Film Festival, which was new for Can, and I'm not sure if it was new for you, but can you tell us a little bit about your experience at ATX this year?
Yes, so I am a TV writer based in Los Angeles, and I was there because I had developed a pitch based on my book, No One Gets to Fall Apart, which is about the year that my mom was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And no one in my family understood what it was. We'd never seen it before. I come from a family of healthcare professionals, nurses and naturopaths, but we still had no idea what to do when we were faced with her sort of first delusions and her first psychotic break. And so I started writing about it, and I published a book, a memoir about that first year in 2024. And I was at the festival because I am developing a TV show kind of in alignment with the same themes that the book is about in terms of caregiving, motherhood, having a loved one with schizophrenia, and the legacy of mental illness as it's passed down through generations.
That's very insightful. Thank you for sharing that. I just have a couple of questions I think you have a very unique lens on the intersection between caregiving and the art of storytelling. And I would just like to illustrate that, hopefully for our audience and see where we land with such a conversation. As a creative who finds themselves in caregiving, providing care for your family and your loved ones, do you find yourself noticing the story in other people's art? Like now that you are tuned in as a caregiver, do you find yourself saying, hey?
Yeah, absolutely. My background is in creative writing, so I have always turned to books as a way of understanding the world. So the reason I wrote this book is because I'm a big reader. I wanted to be in conversation with other artists who were dealing with the same thing. So there's a book by an Indigenous writer named Marie Therese Milo called Heartberries, which is about her own journey as a mother who had a bipolar mother and who is trying to raise her children while negotiating her own mental illness. One of the main questions I had was, should I have children? Because I know that this is something that is inherited in my family. My book traces, my grandmother's dysphoria. My grandfather had severe borderline personality disorder before anybody knew to diagnose a man with that. So there were just a lot of questions that I was always looking to books for. And I wrote the book because I wanted other people to be able to look to my book if they were to experience something similar. And I would say more recently, the book Ken by Terry Jones also takes on mental illness and mother-daughter relationships. And I really saw a lot of my own experience in that book. And yeah, my hope is just that I can write to be part of that conversation in a way that's useful for other people who are confronting these issues.
Absolutely. Some people describe caregiving as a very isolating journey sometimes, that it's not always instantly understood. Some of the financial realities or the practical realities or even the emotional realities of caregiving. When you were consuming these other works of art and when you were doing the research in your family, did you ever have moments where you felt maybe a sense of not just visibility, but even camaraderie or belonging with other caregivers who might have been telling their stories or might have been engaged in writing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it is really isolating and it can be really lonely. I also turned a lot to nonfiction. There's a great book called Surviving the Borderline Mother that I read and sought out other people who had read that book because my mom had borderline personality disorder before she was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and was able to find other people online who had also been touched by this book. I did a lot of therapy and was recommended books also in that same vein. So I think the main thing, again, the reason I wanted to write this book is because I want other people to know that they're not alone, because it meant so much to me to discover that I'm not alone. I can't remember if I mentioned the book Transcendent Kingdom by Ya Gyasi, which was another amazing novel about a daughter of a woman with severe depression. And I also teach creative writing. So I read that book and I taught it. And it was just so meaningful to me to be able to bring that book to other people and bring my own personal experience and hear my students talk about it. The more you share these stories, the more you talk about it, the more you realize that almost everyone has been touched in some way by all of this. And there isn't a language for it. And I think these books and movies and all these stories about caregiving are trying to establish a language so that it's easier to talk about and the stigma disappears.
Absolutely. So I want to ask a little bit more, just adding some texture to this particular angle of the conversation. Have there been any observations of maybe how culture has intersected or impacted how your family approaches caregiving?
There's actually a lot of research. This is interesting. There's a great book by Rachel Aviv called Strangers to Ourselves, where she looks at schizophrenia and other mental illnesses that have delusion as a symptom across, economic divides and class structures and different hierarchies. And um, something that kind of comes up again, over and over again in these books is that in places like West Africa, when a family member is diagnosed with delusions, they aren't isolated. Instead, they're thought of as they're they're kind of just kept and brought into the family and continued to sort of be given a job. And sometimes the outcomes for that reason are a lot better than they are in places like the United States, where there's a lot of sort of medical intervention or not, that is imposed upon the person. And then this is controversial. There's no way to say one approach is going to lead to a better outcome than a different approach. But I will say that in my family, just because of our history, my grandmother really did not trust doctors, and she was my mom's primary caregiver. It was very important to her that my mom be able to live at home and, not and be able to make her own decisions and still feel like she was in some way, an autonomous individual for as long as possible. And, that's not always the approach that every family takes, but I think our history as Black women in Texas, there was a lot of distrust of institutional medicine. And in the end, what ended up working for us was kind of a mix of the two, where, yes, absolutely, my mom has to be medicated. I don't think there's any question about, schizophrenia. Schizophrenia doesn't spontaneously go away, right?
Mhm.
You do have to take your medication, but also she's treated like a person. I try when I'm talking to her to take what she's seeing and thinking and feeling seriously and meet her at her level. And she was allowed to stay at home. And I think one thing that helped a lot was just that my grandmother didn't make a huge deal out of it. We just sort of took it day by day, and it was hard for everyone, but I think that was one thing that relieved the burden a little bit.
Absolutely. How how important has it been for you to remember yourself even as you're caring for someone else, someone so significant to your experience?
I mean, I think that was also part of the reason I wrote the book, because something that you don't hear a lot in these stories is your relationship to the person who is suffering fundamentally changes after their diagnosis and after they're exhibiting symptoms, right? But whatever relationship you had before that doesn't go away. And my mom was, when I was growing up, she was abusive. We were not close. When she was diagnosed, she was 53. I was in my early 30s, and we weren't speaking. We hadn't spoken for 2 years because our relationship had just completely fractured. And once she started taking medication for schizophrenia, it's not like sort of the things about her that made her difficult for me to be around just went away. I was still negotiating those things. And I understood that there was still a lot of stress that came with my being around her. And so I had to keep that in mind. There were times when it was, good for me to be around her, when I was the only person that she trusted and I could ask her questions or convince her to go to the doctor or convince her to take medication when no one else could. But then there are also times when I was the enemy and she didn't want to be around me and she didn't trust me and she didn't um she didn't see me as an ally. And in those cases, I had to not take that personally and sort of keep that in the context of our long-term relationship and make sure that I was getting therapy. And for me, a lot of the times, what's really therapeutic is just writing everything down, trying to make sense of the story for myself and keeping track of it in a way that where I'm not getting lost in my mother's illness. So the sort of actual act of writing and chronicling that, a lot of that, yes, I am a writer by profession, but it's also something that I'm doing for myself to stay sane.
Absolutely. I really appreciate the honesty in those remarks that you made because a lot of times caregivers feel pressure to almost rewrite history in the relationship of the people that they are providing support to. And it's not always very easy to do. And I think that when we say, how do you remember yourself? Sometimes the most honorable thing you can do is to be honest with yourself about the true state of the relationship and um not volunteer yourself for harm or for breaking and not seeing the fullness of the picture. I greatly appreciate you sharing that. I wish we had all the time in the world. I just want to make sure that I do get to this because I think it's fascinating how these real experiences show up in our art, not unlike working caregivers that we also support who have to kind of juggle all of the balls and just be aware of somebody else's needs and wants and even the gaps in those services, even as they work. But I'm fascinated by this intersection of caregiving and art. We know that caregiving is not flat and neither is art. Both are fluid. The situation can change by the moment, if not by the day. It can be personal, it can even be political. In this undertaking of your project, No One Gets to Fall Apart, at that intersection of caregiving and art, has it impacted or influenced your appreciation of other expressions of this reality in various genres?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we talked about this before. Sometimes I'll just be watching whatever Netflix true crime special is trendy that week, just in the background, and there'll be this question of, there's one right now that's about terrible neighbors, and they're like, this crazy neighbor is harassing me, and it's interesting, and you can see how it's entertainment. But for me, as somebody who has firsthand experience with schizophrenia, it's always obvious to me that the symptoms that whatever the crazy neighbor on this Netflix special is demonstrating, those symptoms are symptoms of schizophrenia. And I think more people need to know that. And it bothers me when it's exploited in that way for entertainment, as opposed to sort of being used to raise awareness. A lot, I think the lack of awareness of schizophrenia is at the root of a lot of major issues right now around things like homelessness, violent crime. I mean, if there was understanding about what schizophrenia actually looks like, I think the solutions to some of these problems could be found a lot more easily, but people tend to sensationalize it. So in that sense, I think it's influenced my appreciation of certain things negatively. It's harder for me to find stories like that in any way appropriate, and I don't understand sort of how there's just this major blind spot in our culture around all of it that I don't think I was aware of before my mom was diagnosed. And it's something that, again, as a writer, I am working really hard to change, and not just in with my book, but in TV as well. Um, but then in terms of sort of in a more positive way, absolutely. I mean, I seek out more recently, there have been movies like there was a really great movie called If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You, which was an indie film about a mom taking care of a child with severe ARFID. And I just empathized so much with that character. She was based on the writer who had a child who had to have a feeding tube because they wouldn't eat, and just how difficult it was, the total lack of a network or of support. So, I really try to watch movies like that, support the people who are creating them, and talk about them, because I don't know, I think people get afraid to talk about what it means to care for someone with severe mental illness because they worry that it'll happen to them. And it just seems so impossible. But I just think the more stories there are out there about that, the more people realize every occasion is different. None of these are the same. And the solution always comes with community, and community comes from more and more people being aware and talking openly about their experiences.
Absolutely. You have really graced us with impactful perspective on what this looks like, as you're trying to transmute all of this experience and energy into something useful and something consumable by the community around you. I do hope that people will take the time to interact with your story and to learn more about you. Again, we have slides later on in our deck where we will show you the cover art of Sarah's book to make sure that you can recognize it. And we'll also place supports in the chat in case you're interested in obtaining that book, as well as some others that we have listed here today. But Sarah, thank you so much for this few minutes to get to know you and to understand more about your perspective on schizophrenia caregiving. It's been really, really impactful to our audience, and I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity.
No problem. Well, Sarah isn't really going anywhere. We are going to now pivot into the main feature of our summit today, which is our caregiver peer learning panel in the first person, where we will discuss the caregiver's experience. I am joined by our storytellers for today, who include Maria Case, who is the founder of Compassion. She's a caregiver and advocate in Los Angeles, California. Nicole Gillen, author and family caregiver hailing from Reston, Virginia. Krista Hickey, who is also a caregiver and mental health advocate in Ephraim, Wisconsin. Sarah Labrie, who we just heard from, who's an author and a caregiver also out of LA, Los Angeles, California. and Brianna Ryan Smolinski, who's a family caregiver out of New York. And finally, Christy Stonehill, who is a caregiver and advocate and also serves as executive director of NAMI in Rappahannock, Virginia. Ladies, welcome to our panel. So nice to see you today.
Hi.
Hi. So we're just going to jump right into it. And I would just like to go in that same order, starting with Maria. And the question to everyone, where everyone will have an opportunity to answer, is who are you caring for and how long have you been providing care and support? Maria, if you could start us off.
Hi, my name is Maria Case. Thank you again for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I care for my mother who was diagnosed with schizophrenia about 11 years ago. Um, I'm a Mexican. I'm Mexican, so in our culture, we don't, believe in, schizophrenia or any mental health. So it's been very challenging to be where I am today. So again, thank you for having me.
No problem. Nicole Gillen?
Yes, can you hear me, Amira?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. So, first of all, thank you so much for allowing me to be here today. Having sessions like this with the voices that you're having today, who are talking about our experiences, just is so powerful, and I'm honored. I am the mother of an adult daughter with schizophrenia. She's 28, almost 29 years old. This started a little over 6 years ago for her after she graduated from college, and just basically ripped her entire life away from her and changed our relationship, changed her life trajectory, changed my life trajectory. And on one hand, I am equally honored to be her mom because she's such a beautiful soul, and angry at the world for doing this to her. So whatever I can do here to help in that conversation, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Krissa, can I go to you, please?
Sure. Hi. My name is Krissa. I caregive my son, Timothy, who is 32 years old. He was diagnosed with a mental health disorder at the age of 7, and it was officially schizophrenia, childhood onset schizophrenia at the age of 11. So we've been on this journey for most of his life, 21, more than almost 30 years now. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit more about our story.
I appreciate you being here. We just heard from Sarah Labrie, but Sarah, if you just want to tell people a little bit, just a snippet in case they're just joining us.
Sure. Hi, my name is Sarah. I am a long distance caregiver now for my mother who was diagnosed with schizophrenia at the age of 53. Her primary caregiver is my grandmother and my aunt, and I travel back and forth from LA to Houston to visit her and do what I can now that I am no longer in Houston.
Thank you. Brianna.
Hi, my name is Brianna. Thank you for having me here today. I care for my younger brother. He's 28, and I've been providing support for him over the past 6 years. He was officially diagnosed 5 years ago, but I think it's important to connect with others and hear other personal stories, just to allow for a more inclusive environment. There's always something new to learn.
Thank you so much for being with us today. And finally, Christy.
Hi, everyone. I am a caregiver to my adult daughter who had a psychotic break 5 years ago and is in recovery and stable and doing well. But here I am, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Well, Christy, we'll get started actually with you. We talk, and one of the points of having this panel is to make sure that people understand the power of community and also recognize the presence of it. Could you take us through what community looks like around you and your daughter as you navigate this diagnosis?
Yeah, so I thought a lot about this, and one of the things I always like to say is that when my daughter first had her break, I know for me, I did not just jump right into the role of caregiver because I didn't really understand that role in the beginning. And I wanted to just shut the door and close the blinds and hope that nobody found out. But I soon realized that that was not going to be productive for me or for anyone around me. So I think that community is more, obviously, it's great to have a loving and supportive family and have great friends, but community is really about connecting with those that have been in similar journeys that you can relate to and kind of say the things that you can't really say out loud to everyone else, but you can find that relatability factor to navigate your situation.
Absolutely. Anybody else want to add just a point about community? How does it look around you and your loved one as you navigate this particular diagnosis?
Sure, I would love to share.
Sure.
So for us, in our culture has been very challenging because we had a lot of limited beliefs in we have a lot of limited beliefs in our culture. Number one, medicine is the enemy. Schizophrenia is witchcraft. There's just so many limited beliefs around around that illness. So finding support for my mother didn't really exist. We needed it in Spanish and we couldn't find it in our community. Finally, in our whole entire county, we found one and there was only 5 people. So because there's not very many people talking about it, it was very difficult. Another thing that we also struggled with is finding a physician that actually speaks my mother's language, which is a reason why it took her 7 years to get diagnosed with schizophrenia, and she was not consistent on the medication. So there's just a lot that goes into supporting, but once we did find community, everything changed because we saw someone that spoke our language, that went through what we went through, and finally we felt like there was a path forward.
Absolutely. I think that more themes about community might emerge as we continue to talk, but Maria, I'm so happy that you are kind of drawing out how culture impacts how we perceive if we are seen and supported. I think that one of the goals of not only this initiative, but programs like this is that we help caregivers who are feeling isolated or disconnected for things that they cannot change. You cannot change the fact that you come from a Mexican community or that you're a woman or that you live in a rural area. We just want to make sure that people feel one, that we don't gaslight them, that it might be really hard to find community around yourself when you're dealing with challenging circumstances, but also to just encourage the discernment to see it when it does emerge, because our goal is just to make things better. Sarah, I'll pivot to you in that we're talking about community and relationship and advocacy. A lot of caregivers struggle with self-identification. They don't say, I'm a caregiver. They say, I'm a spouse, I'm a mom, I'm a dad, I'm a sibling. But you are very clear that, your care experiences around supporting your mother and really your grandmother as she supports your mother, but you're long distance. So can you walk us through how your family engages you in the care plan for your mom?
Yeah, so I think one thing that is helpful is that because I'm long distance, I'm not dealing with the day to day, especially when at times when my mom was in crisis, where it was kind of all my grandmother and my aunt could do to keep her safe, to keep themselves safe, to try and make sure, they knew where she was. I was able to spend time, I read this great book called I'm Not Sick, I Don't Need Help by, I think his name is Dr. Xavier Amador. And it's just sort of a guide to how to get somebody to take meds, go see a doctor, accept that they might need help when they have no insight into their condition. So I was able to read that book and tell them, here's what I think you should do. And here's the LEAP method, which ended up being very helpful. I went to the NAMI caregivers or loved ones for schizophrenia support group, and they have classes, and I went to those out here, and then my family in Houston went to the ones in Houston, and we were able to share resources that we got from that. I spent a lot of time on Reddit, just a lot of time reading books, and learned about things like, the injections where you can get medication that'll last for 6 months as opposed to having to take a pill every month and that kind of thing. So when they're in kind of emergency mode, I am the person who's able to kind of like think and provide solutions and options that they might not find on their own.
That's important to acknowledge. Thank you for that. Carissa, hi. I think you have an especially compelling story about caring for your son, Tim. Can you tell us more about how relocating has impacted how you both engage in community?
Sure. So when Tim was officially diagnosed, as a child, he was 11. We lived in the greater Chicago area in the suburbs. And as Tim got older, as Tim got older, it became difficult for us to see how, as an adult, we would be able to keep him safe in a city like Chicago, for a couple of reasons. One, he grew very tall very fast. He went through puberty like that, so he's a little over 6 feet tall. Two, he's African American. And three, he's got a serious mental illness, which seems like a pretty nasty combination if you're loose at 18 years old in the city of Chicago. So my husband and his family, he's fourth or fifth generation from a very small town in Northeast Wisconsin. It's a very lovely place. We've got a lot of friends and family here. And we decided 10 years ago, when Tim was right about 21, that probably the best thing for us to do was to keep him in a smaller environment, because that way we didn't have to worry about him having a psychotic break or having some kind of episode where he was in a city like Chicago and interacting with a police department or the public or somebody who probably didn't understand what he might be going through. So we made a move. It was a really big change for us. We have two other children, one younger and one older than Tim. They eventually made the move up here as well with their families, which is great. I have been working from home for a decade to help support, because I work in computer software, so not a lot of jobs in a town of 343 people for computer software. So I managed to work from home. But here, Tim really has a place where he has the most freedom. It's the least restrictive environment for him. And we've been able to create a community around him that supports him. For example, my husband went to school with pretty much, or is related to, like 3/4 of the people around in our town and the surrounding towns. So Tim can't walk into a bar, for example, and get more than one beer without being told, no, Tim, you know how that messes with your meds. And I don't have to worry about it. Or we had a time a couple years into moving up here where Tim went off of his meds because of side effects, and he didn't tell me about it. He lives in his own apartment, by the way, just a few miles from us. And I got 3 phone calls in a single day that said, I saw Tim today and he was a little off. Is he all right? Or is he still on his meds? I just want to make sure you know about it. And I had no clue. So we know that, and we have set up a way in the small community where we know Tim is going to be taken care of even after we're long gone. And that community, it was really interesting when we were very open. We've always been very open about Tim's diagnosis, and Tim is totally great with that. He's talked to lots of people about having schizophrenia. But when you tell people, yeah, this is Tim, and the reason, he's a little eccentric is he has schizophrenia, they say, oh, like they had no clue what it looked like. Now they know. And we've kind of unknowingly created a bunch of advocates around town that not only look out for Tim, but also know what it looks like when a person has a serious mental illness.
I love that. And I like how intentional you've been about creating the community, regardless of what location. You describe Chicago, which is urban and has its own set of challenges, but also Ephraim, which sounds way more rural and just gives him a little bit more free range to have the autonomy and some of the independence that people do not want to be robbed of, even as they treat their mental health. So That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Brianna, I want to pivot to you. Because it's not all easy, right? And I think caregivers sometimes don't realize where the gaps in information are, and they don't realize where maybe some of the barriers to being super successful as a caregiver might lie. So I just wanted to ask you, what would you say is the top challenge as you support your brother in your brother's care? What do you think can be done to improve your access to any supports that help him make solid decisions?
Yeah, it took me a while to think about like one specific challenge because there's so many that are involved in caregiving. But most recently, what I've been focused on is maintaining the support for my brother while also maintaining his trust and respecting his independence when making medical decisions, when encouraging him to go to doctor's appointments, encouraging him to take meds. I have to show up in a creative way. It's not like just an automatic response. Like it's a lot of mental, okay, how am I going to get him to do this? And what am I going to say to make it so he's more agreeable and also trusts me in the process? So I think I struggle with the role as I want to be his sister, and I don't want him to look at me as an enforcer or controlling his medical decisions. But for now, he has trusted me throughout the last 5 years. We've been through a lot of ups and downs. I've had to go to court and to get him on medication. And I always think, oh my goodness, we're not going to come back from this. He's not going to talk to me. He always comes back and talks to me, and trusts me. So right now with his setup, he's in an assisted outpatient treatment. So like he has a whole team that I communicate with, and I make sure to communicate with them daily. I send them an email every day about his mood, side effects, and medications. I just want them to know that he has somebody in his corner advocating for him. And also respecting him, because he did just recently start a new medication about a month ago, and that comes with side effects. And he was voicing those side effects. And this is the first time he's been voicing side effects in the past 5 years. And that was like huge. So I wanted to make that a point for them to acknowledge that in front of him. I do think of future, I'm looking into guardianship, power of attorney. I do think that would bring me more of awareness of decisions being made behind the scenes. But for now, he does allow me to have full, total involvement in his care and talking to his team. So that would be the biggest barrier, just that role as sister, versus enforcer, and then the access to his care. If that's why I'm trying to think of ways, because it could change where he doesn't trust me or want me in his care fully, and I have to make sure I'm in his corner the whole way.
Absolutely. That's a very compelling point. Nicole, I want to pivot to you because I feel like these two questions kind of blend, and you can build a bridge for us. There are barriers to sharing information, and to Brianna's point, she's thinking about, what documents will help me to support my brother, and not so much me taking control, but really me supporting this adult. Can you offer some more insight into the challenge of like securing these types of documents, or even support services such as housing, disability, and insurance, how you've seen that play out with your daughter?
Yeah, so it's almost like the intersection of what Krista, Sarah, and Brianna said, in the sense that number one of the key pieces here is, Amira, have we just lost you? Your screen went blank. Or is
I'm
it me?
here.
Okay.
I'm
All right.
here. My video just went out.
All right. Well, anyways, so number one is trust, and having that trusting relationship. There was the earlier conversation about, how do you take care of a parent? How do you take care of a brother? Well, what's interesting is that caregiver, if it's your child and they're an adult, well, now it's an entirely different relationship as well. So even being a mom, it doesn't necessarily capture the spirit. So when you move into things like guardianship, power of attorney, conservatorship, all of that, which is dealing with HIPAA, you have to start with trust. You have to have that relationship where you can say, look, this is the legal vehicle I want to have in place in order to help you. And that's a difficult conversation to have, because the person you're talking to may not be at a point where they can really even understand what you're fundamentally trying to achieve with them. And that's sort of step one, because then all the other things that follow, housing, disability services, whatever it might be. And in each state, across our lovely states, across the US, it's different. Everything from hospitals are different, Medicaid is different, disability is different, HIPAA is dealt with differently, jails are different, you name it across the board, it's all different. And so you're a caregiver, whether you're a daughter, a sister, a mother, whatever your role is, you have to think about this on your own in every single state because there is no unified way to go about doing it. So you have to start with that trust. And then you have to move into what are the services we need in my state and how do I go about getting this once I've established that trust in that legal vehicle. So it's a lot. It is a lot for caregivers to have to figure out and maneuver, in addition to providing them the treatment support they might need. And so it is, none of us are trained for it. None of us understand what in the world we're doing when it begins. And it's just more of the complexity that's added to our plates in the process. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Maria, you spoke specifically, and Sarah kind of touched on it too, just the challenge of navigating culture when it comes into creating community and finding support. How has that understanding personally impacted how you discuss mental health with family or friends or conducting outreach, even when you understand that it might be taboo to do so?
Well, it was very difficult in the beginning because growing up that way, I grew up with those limited beliefs, so I kind of believed them myself. But being, desperate enough to like my mom, being lost and seeking authority support to help her, of having surrounded by helicopters looking for my mom, it was very scary. And I just realized it was something that I had to seek help. And when I did seek help, I live in close to LA County and Orange County. We're a very large county. And because there was very little support in Spanish, I knew that in order for our family to seek support, it wasn't just educating myself, it was educating my father. Because my father believed that medication was the enemy. And when my mother first got into, taking medication, he would see side effects and he would be like, see, it's true. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And because of that, we had a lot of fights over like what to give her, and it was a lot of trial and error, and understanding that that comes with it was very difficult. And then once my mom got on a long lasting injection, that's when everything started shifting for us, because we started seeing my mom coming back to us. And that's when the trust started happening. And it took time. And again, community, seeking the people that speak our language. It's so different going to an event and seeing everyone speaking about schizophrenia, but when you don't see someone that understands your culture, it's very, very hard to help someone. So when my father ended up hearing people that, had those same beliefs, but now is seeking support for their loved ones, and their loved ones are starting to feel better, that changed everything for our family. That is literally what helped us, go forward with this.
Thank you for that. Brianna, what does it look like when your care plan and your medication management plan are working well?
I would say it looks like my brother is coming back to himself in a way. He's sleeping better. He's able to engage with us more. He's willingly spending time around family. And that is all dependent on the communication between myself and his team, especially like just for the most recent months with the medication change, we've had a few bumps. Like, just for example, he was supposed to be getting a dissolvable tablet and it was one you swallow. And then he was cheeking the pill for a week and I thought it was dissolvable. And that communication breakdown, it makes me mad, but then you also have to communicate with his team every day and not ruin that relationship. So when there's that communication, that's why I try to reach out to them every day, and just make it clear, like, I want to know when his dosage is going up, or I want to know who he's meeting with in the office today so I can preset him and let him know who he's meeting with. And when the concerns are addressed promptly instead of brushed under the rug. But most importantly, I just think it's always a work in progress getting to that successful care plan, because at the end of the day, it's what brings my brother a more functional quality of life, where he can participate, where he can engage in activities that are of interest to him. But I really do think it comes to the communication between caregivers, my brother, and the medical team managing his medications.
So Maria mentioned a long-lasting injectable. You've mentioned dissolving a dissolving pill. I guess there's so many different options to be considered when you're saying, what will it take to create a successful treatment plan? And I kind of want to pivot to Krista on this. What impact has the various medication delivery methods had on your caregiving, if any?
Oh God, a lot. So when Tim was finally stabilized, so it took us from 11 to 9, almost 20 to get Tim stable, because you can imagine what puberty and schizophrenia do. A nice combo. So he was on clozapine, which anyone who has a loved one with schizophrenia probably heard of. It has several black box warnings from the FDA. It used to require a blood test weekly or biweekly in order to just get your pills dispensed. So our entire lives and my relationship with Tim revolved around pills and how to get those pills, him to take those pills. And as he got older, and then as he got stable, and then became an adult, rather than transitioning to an adult relationship, we still had this, our entire conversations revolved around, hey, Tim, it's mom, did you take your pills today? Or finding a solution where he had to scan something so it would ping my phone to let me know he took his meds. And it became this kind of adversarial thing. When Tim switched to a long-acting injectable, a lot of it was because of that. A lot was because of side effects of the clozapine, but our relationship changed. Now we don't talk about meds almost at all. He goes down and gets a shot once a month. And I say goes down because it's about a 28-mile drive to his doctor's office. But so we take him down and get a shot about once a month. And other than that, he lives his life. He's been able to go on vacation with his sister. They went on a car trip for like 2 weeks, didn't have to worry about whether or not he had somewhere to get a blood test done or where he could pick up his dispensed meds. Didn't have to worry about whether he was taking his pills because he didn't need to. He's gone with friends up to the UP in Michigan to go snowmobiling. And I mean, he has a life now that isn't driven by medication. And we have a relationship that isn't me hounding him to take his meds and him, feeling resentful of that.
Absolutely. So that's what it looks like when it's going well. Nicole and even Christy, you can chime in on this as well. I'll start with Nicole though. Are there any challenges? What have been the challenges when it's not so smooth as when it comes to obtaining and then maintaining consistency in a medication and treatment plan?
So many people here probably know schizophrenia is really not one illness. It's a collection of illnesses and symptoms. There's positive symptoms, negative symptoms, cognitive symptoms. A lot of medications really only kind of get at some of the positive symptoms. And depending on your own body and chemistry and all sorts of stuff, many of the medications may not even get to those positive symptoms, which means so many people out there who are trying, whether it's a long-acting injectable or something like clozapine or whatever, are still generally undertreated because the medications are not efficacious. It's a problem. And so, my kiddo, bless her, was always treatment compliant, but we went through 5 antipsychotics where they didn't put a dent in her symptoms. And now she's on clozapine, she's doing better, but the reality is she still has symptoms every single day, positive symptoms. That doesn't mean good. It just means it's like the delusions and hallucinations. And so it's so complex, even from a treatment perspective, because nobody responds in the same way. Unlike a lot of cancers, where they are much more precision in their therapy, this is just thrown darts sideways where nobody knows where it's going to land and is it even going to work in the first place. And so to get good treatment, to get your loved one on the right path, requires this weird like magic process. It's not necessarily scientific. And I think that's another part of the struggle that we all face. But I want to touch on TK as a question out there about getting their loved one on medication. Well, if they have anosognosia and they don't think they're sick, it goes back to the book that Sarah mentioned, the I'm Not Sick, I Don't Need Help. and talking to them in such a way that puts the disease aside, that puts this whole, who cares whether or not you have schizophrenia? Let's talk about the fact that you're not who you once were. And how can we help you get to a better place? And it's an entirely different conversation that you have to learn with whoever your loved one might be. So there's a lot of murkiness between the meds not being great, and then you've got something with so many like anosognosia. How do you find a path forward?
Absolutely. Christine, do you want to say anything about that? I'm thinking about you and I just wedged you right on in here.
I think for my situation, it was much like Nicole's. We went through 9 antipsychotics. Those included various types of medications. My daughter never lost her voices. So that was a very frustrating aspect, but we were told that that possibly might happen. But I think for us, just to kind of pivot from what Nicole is saying, that a lot of these medications do not obviously treat the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. And so I think a lot of people don't really account for that because you're assuming that, well, we're getting this medication, we're going to fix all of this. And then that is kind of a blow in the beginning of your journey as a caregiver because you realize that you may take away all of these harrowing symptoms, the positive symptoms, but a lot of the negative symptoms remain.
Okay. Maria, I just want to pivot to you. As we're talking about treatment and knowing that it's not one size fits all, I think that sometimes caregivers and even the person who's experiencing the diagnosis, they get focused on treating the headline, treating the schizophrenia, and there might not be a huge understanding of side effects and other things that can come up as you are taking medicine for your headline. What do you wish caregivers knew about the possibility of side effects in their care planning? You're muted.
In my experience, I wish there was some sort of education as far as like different medications, because I had to step in to help my mother and take her to her visits. And that's when we started getting answers because there wasn't a psychiatrist that actually spoke her language. She wasn't getting answers as to what she had a diagnosis with psychosis. That's what she thought she had all this time, and it's something that would go away. And she didn't need to be consistent with her medication. So when I stepped in, I was never told of the different types of treatments. They would just give us one option. They would put her on that one, and that was it. When she was held on a 5150, that's when they gave me options. I started asking questions like, is there something else? I never heard about a long-lasting injection. I never did it took us like 8 years to know about it. So that was when, again, when we started seeing the difference and we started seeing a path forward for my mother and started seeing her like be more consistent and come back to herself. So I definitely feel like I wish there was more education right from the start when they're telling you that, there's something going on, like more education as to what's out there versus just trying to figure it out and going through all those, hurdles. So that, and then just how difficult it is to navigate this on your own and just knowing that you need support for yourself too, not just for your loved one, because schizophrenia is a family disease. It just doesn't affect that person. It affects the whole entire family.
Absolutely. So as we've been having this conversation, I just want to alert the audience to the poll questions that we have where our panel has expressed not quite knowing all the options or the implication of the options. And we just wanted to ask you as well. So we have our poll question up on your screen. Please feel free to answer it. It'll be a series of questions, but we don't want to lose the feedback. This is very rich conversation, and we hope to use it to inform our efforts to support caregivers. So thank you guys for that. I want to pivot into what it means for caregivers to take care of themselves. A lot of times, no matter how much outreach we do to all manner of people, we encounter a full spectrum of feelings, thoughts and feelings and reflections over the caregiving journey. Some are extremely positive, some are not. People can feel very frustrated, for lack of a better term, with their caregiving journey. And unfortunately, caregiving can eat up a lot of your time. It can eat up a lot of your brain space to the point where you almost get lost in the delivery of care and support for somebody else. So I think it's important, even with the diagnosis of schizophrenia, where we're saying that this is one of the more challenging mental health diagnoses to support someone with, that caregivers still need to be supported for themselves and still need to have to be seen and to be heard. Solely for their own quality of life, because how can you pour from an empty cup? We hear that all the time. How can you pour from an empty cup? How do you know where your support comes from? So I think it's valuable for people to hear from you on that. I'll start with you, Christy. How do you maintain your boundaries in caregiving, drowning out the noise and keeping a healthy focus?
So for me as a caregiver, I'm a huge proponent of drowning out the noise. And when I say that, when I first started in our situation, I had so many people, family, friends, or just people in general, that they had an answer for everything. So it was, you should be doing this, or I wouldn't be doing this, or why are you not doing this? And so I realized I got so off track because I would lay down at night and in my mind, I would let all of those voices come in and it would say, well, maybe I should have been doing this, and I was constantly doubting myself or regretting something, and something that I hadn't thought about before I was now thinking about, that I hadn't even, it wasn't even on my radar. So one of the things I'm a huge proponent of as a caregiver is you have to drown the noise out. I don't care if this is your best friend, your closest sister or brother, if they are not living in your home and walking in your shoes and, right there alongside that journey, they can never experience what you are actually experiencing yourself. And so you have to, as a caregiver, I think the biggest portion for me personally in my journey was drowning out all of that noise and saying, I have to make decisions based on what's best for me and what's best on my loved one and what's best on my immediate family who is residing with me.
Absolutely. Krista, I'll pivot to you, and then I'll go back to Nicole. Have there been any feeling, well, not even have there, when feelings present of frustration or guilt or just like not always positive feelings, how do you keep that in check?
Oh boy, that's a hard one. I think I have to echo what Sarah said earlier, which is what's helped me a lot over the past 20 some odd years with this journey is therapy for me. It kind of helps sometimes to have a neutral third party that's not a friend trying to give me advice, or a doctor telling us, no joke, this happened, that we should give up our parental rights of Tim to the state so we can get care. I mean, if I can drown those people out and get help, and even with my husband and I mean, the fact that we're still married after, 20 some odd years of dealing with this, it's kind of a miracle. A lot of special needs parents, no matter what the kid's special needs is, their marriages don't always survive, but we can't always be objective with each other. So having my own therapist has been really beneficial over the years. And it's just someone who understands mental health and can listen and be an objective third party without trying to always give me advice, but let me help process the feelings and the frustration. Not everybody's perfect at it. I have definitely failed more times than I'd like to admit in being frustrated with Tim or at a doctor or at something that's going on. But everyone needs their own sounding board, and a therapist for me was the best option.
So, how do you keep those feelings of frustration or guilt in check?
So I'm going to say I completely agree with Krissa and Christy. You have to drown out the noise. You have to, put on the gas mask, the oxygen mask first, right before you take care of someone else. Yeah. All of that, 100%. But honestly, the sadness, the frustration, the deep sorrow of what my beautiful child is going to have to deal with for the rest of her life, that doesn't leave me. There's a beautiful book Jerry Clark wrote about the ambiguous loss that we all have to face, that our loved one is not who they once were. And I'd be lying if I said it didn't impact me every single day. But having a therapist helps. For me, working out helps. But the reality is there's that undercurrent that is a part of our lives.
Absolutely. Brianna, I'll go to you. Um, Caregiving can seem thankless and never ending and leads to burnout and even other health issues, even as you care for your brother. How have you been mindful to take care of yourself?
Yeah, I would say for a long time, I put my brother's needs before my own, especially in the beginning when we were in the like crisis stage of everything. It was like I was just in fight or flight all the time. And I didn't really recognize that until like a year and a half, where I started getting exhausted. And it just felt like it felt impossible to also be helping him while carrying on all my other responsibilities. So at that point, I realized like if I'm burnt out, I can't be the support my brother needs. And I got into therapy, and I want to say it's really important finding the right therapist for you, because I've gone through a couple and they said the same thing. Why don't you? One of them printed out information on an institution like for 4 hours away. And I'm like, how is this going to help me or my mental state unless I'm going there with him? Like it just it's just finding the right therapist, finding an activity that you love doing. For me, it's going outside, getting sun, walking. That is a non-negotiable every day. I do that in the morning, just start off my morning, and it gets me in a good, positive mindset. And then most recently, it's realizing tomorrow is a new day. I know it sounds so basic, but probably a couple years prior, if I experienced the up and downs of what I've been experiencing now, I kind of get in like black and white thinking mode, like this is horrible, this is all going downhill, where it's really just ups and downs, and it's always going to be ups and downs. And I've learned to accept that. Um, but just seeing tiny little bits of progress with my brother, him showering more, him saying I love you again. Those things are really what keeps me going. And he's my best friend. And I know if our roles were reversed, he would do this for me in a heartbeat. So that's really what keeps me going every day.
So, my final question in this space, I'm actually going to pose it to both Sarah and Maria because I think you guys have spoken to the relationship, the underlying relationship that supports our caregiving. So, Sarah, I'll start with you. Um, those relationships are the roles, they can be permanent, and sometimes we feel the weight of them. We feel the weight of being daughter, showing up as daughter. We feel the weight of showing up as sister or as niece, in the various roles that we play to our loved ones. And having some level of mindfulness, especially when it comes to practicing gratitude or forgiveness, might really kind of help soothe the wound, any wound that might be there, so that we can stay focused on the task of caregiving. My question to you is, how do you practice gratitude and forgiveness as a part of your self-care as you care for others?
Yeah, I would say I'm a big proponent of feeling overthinking. I try to drop into my body as often as I can, whether that's working out. I have a meditation and visualization practice that I try to stay current on. Some days are better than others, but I think that I am kind of living proof of what gratitude can do, because when my gratitude practice is strongest, usually my life is going the best. I mean, I do know that just dropping into that feeling really works. And often I encounter problems when I'm trying to think my way into solutions as opposed to feeling my way into solutions. So just the more I can do that with, YouTube, meditations, podcasts, whatever I can find, I try to really make that a habit because it does make a huge difference.
Absolutely. Maria, how do you practice gratitude and forgiveness as a part of your self-care and your care for others?
Yeah, so I'm a huge component on just always finding something to be grateful for, because there's always something to be grateful for. So every day in the morning, I write down three things that I'm grateful for. And I also write down wins, with my mom or just in life, period. I created a journal on this topic because life is a journey. And where I am now, I would have never, ever guess that my family and I would be in this space where my father would be speaking on stages with me about the importance of someone with schizophrenia. And because he was so closed-minded, so many limited beliefs. And now I look at everything as a journey, because I would never see this. Me even being here, speaking vulnerably about my mother because it's against our culture. So, and then whenever I have something going on, I always go back and see all the wins that have come with our journey. And that is something to be grateful for, because now I have a different perspective when I see someone on the streets that's speaking to themselves and they're homeless. I used to think that it was because of drugs and alcohol. My mother has never done drugs or alcohol. So I am very grateful for this, being educated and learning more about what people go through.
I appreciate that. Ladies, thank you all. As we consider the closing question, I just wanted to express our gratitude to you all for sharing your story and being vulnerable and being authentic, well, for the benefit of each other, but definitely for the benefit of our audience that's gathered here today. 2030, the year 2030 is only about 3.5 years away, and it is of significant importance as a milestone to Caregiver Action Network. There are just some things that we would like to see improved or changed or impacted in caregiving by that time. And my question to you as we close out this panel is, by 2030, I hope schizophrenia care will. And as you think about that, just that statement, I just welcome your feedback in what can schizophrenia caregiving look like, and what will schizophrenia caregivers be doing by that time? I'd like to start with Christy Stonehill, please.
So when you first framed this question, I had a hard time with it because it seems like that's coming right upon us, right? And serious mental illness is such a big feat. But I will say, when I reflected on the fact that when I started my journey just 5 years ago, almost 6 years ago, none of this was even happening. So a lot has come along in 5 years that I'm hopeful that we will be even more so ahead by 2030. And I guess my primary hope is that we reduce more stigma and we kind of normalize these conversations, at least, about serious mental illness.
Thank you very much. Sarah?
Yeah, awareness. I want more media representation of schizophrenia the way it actually is, as opposed to the sensationalized version that we're all used to. I want people to understand that this is an illness that a lot of people have, that I don't know, is worthy of examination and full study, and the nuance that comes with that, as opposed to just being seen as one thing.
Okay, thank you for that. Brianna?
Yeah, I hope there's faster access to treatment, especially with early intervention, because if you think of how many either months or years are not, I don't want to say wasted, but if they would have, medical providers would have just maybe take a little more time and understand the full picture of what's going on and getting that diagnosis, it would help trying out medications or trying out therapy or trying out treatments. I just think about the time I saw my brother experiencing symptoms to his diagnosis, and it felt like a very long time, and the lengths it took to get him that diagnosis. I just hope there's faster, not even faster, but just more access to early intervention treatment in the future.
Nicole Gillen?
So the Debbie Downer in me says 2030, that's like tomorrow. That's not enough time. I'm thinking about systems change, policy changes, big shifts in all the things, which obviously is not going to happen in 4 years. But to Christy's point, there are conversations like this, the level of awareness that I think is starting to take hold didn't happen 5 years ago. So there is change afoot. New medications like Cobenfy coming out, that's new. So there is stuff happening. Is it going to make me happy in 4 years? Probably not. I want so much more than what's out there. but I am extremely cautiously optimistic, is where I'll put it.
Thank you. And I will go to Maria next, and I'll let Krista close us out. Maria?
Yes, I would say I would love to see more of these spaces, maybe in Spanish as well. I know that is a huge gap in our culture, and hearing from someone has been such a big impact that I have seen in our own events through our organization. And what I've seen people need to hear when they hear our story, then they're like, okay, then they're actually doing okay. So maybe I can do that too. So hearing more, normalizing this in our culture, I feel like that would make a huge impact in communities that have been far overseen.
Thank you. And Krista?
Yeah, I just want to echo someone, Kathleen just commented in the chat that I live in a rural area, and I'd really like to see more investment and the investment return in community care centers and more community-based services for people with serious mental illness. Where I live, we have so my county is very small. We have 28,000 people in this entire county. It's a big county, and we have one prescribing psychiatrist. So and we have no infrastructure as far as we have, I don't have a bus here. There's no Uber. We got one Uber driver. His name's Daryl. I mean, so we need some community-based investment so people with serious mental illness have a community, have resources that they can go to, improve telehealth for places like rural places like Wisconsin, so that these people can get treatment so they can live in their communities. I mean, Tim's not the only person in my county, in Door County, with schizophrenia, but he's the most visible. And the reason he's the most visible is because he came from somewhere else. He wasn't a kid who grew up here with schizophrenia, wasn't a resource, wasn't a doctor, didn't have a community around him. We've created one. And now that we've created one, I'd like to see it expand so that the other people here, like Tim, who have serious bipolar or schizophrenia, have a community and have resources.
Thank you so much for your responses. We're going to open the floor. If I could have Nicole Goebel to join us. We've been getting active chat and active Q&A today. So this has been of so much importance to the community that we serve through Caregiver Action Network. So I am, again, very grateful to you all for providing your insights and your experiences for the benefit of our audience, not just today, but as people, watch this replay on demand. We can only hope to hear back from them how impactful, hopefully, that these perspectives have been. Nicole, if you would like to let us know maybe a highlight of the questions that we can answer. And also, I would also like to call attention for everybody to our poll number 5, which is letting us know what type of resources would be impactful to you. Please answer the poll, and we can begin to take that information and help it inform our follow-ups for this summit, as well as other learnings that we have coming up. Nicole?
Yes. First off, thank you to all of the panel. If you haven't had an opportunity to look in the chat, there really is no way to really put into context the impact you guys sharing your stories has made. So many amazing comments here. And I think this speaks to some of the questions. I think a couple of the questions that came through, we may have already hit on. So I'm going to focus on the ones that maybe we didn't maybe necessarily get to. One is planning and future planning when it comes to caregiving. I know that there's a number of parents who are part of this panel, but this really speaks to any caregiver. How do you prepare that continued care or support for your loved one after you're unable to provide that care or support? I want to open it up first to Krissa, and then, of course, open it up to the rest of the panel for any additional thoughts.
Yeah. We are actively planning. So Tim is 32. I'm 60. There's going to come a time, not in the too distant future, where I'm either, I'm older and God only knows what could happen. But we have a couple things that we are planning on. One, we have set up a special needs trust. We're lucky that Wisconsin has a program called WISPACT, WISPACT, trying to look so I can spell it right, where you can help. It's a pooled special needs trust, so you don't have to worry about hiring an administrator on your own, hiring a lawyer on your own. It's kind of a pooled source so that you have a trust. So funds can go in there. They're not counted against Tim's SSI salary cap. So they can help care for him later in life. And my dad's going to be leaving part of his estate into that. We've got a family friend who doesn't have any kids who wants to leave part of his estate for that for Tim. And we've set that up so that he'll have monetary resources to support him for the things when I don't have a salary anymore, like I'm on Social Security or I'm on, my investments, to be able to help support him. The other thing is, really, we have guardianship of Tim, which is very important. And of course, for us, it was a non-starter because Tim was diagnosed so young and had so many cognitive issues along the ride. But it's also that succession planning for his guardianship. And I want to caution, we made a very conscious decision not to have one of Tim's siblings be his guardian, his successive guardian, because they have a very close relationship. Tim's very close to his sisters. They're one's older, one's younger. And we want them to maintain that relationship and not have to worry about this person saying, yes, you can have money from the trust, or no, you can't do that, or whatever. So we have other people that we know and trust that are in the plan for succession planning. It still scares us, but because I'm a control freak, what's going to happen when I'm not here. But I think it's important to have that plan and have it well in advance of when you think you're going to need it.
Thank you, Krista. And I'm really glad that you spoke to that. I know we also have Brianna, who is on our panel, who is a sibling caregiver. And certainly we know that caregiving changes some of those dynamics in a relationship too. And you definitely want to be able to know what is working for your family, for your loved one, and make those decisions accordingly. Does anyone else have anything that they would want to add before we move on to the next question about future planning?
Nope, go ahead.
All right, here we go. Next question. And I think this is something that is really, really interesting. So we had someone who is in attendance, caregiver from an immigrant household, and caring for a number of different people, both siblings and parents. The question that they came to the chat with was, do you have any advice for people like me who provide the stabilitating force for others, but don't have a support network themselves, a support system to kind of prop them up? We talked a lot about self-care and caregivers needing their own support outside of the kind of day-to-day. And what advice do you have for someone who may be struggling to find those support mechanisms? I'll open this one up wide. Who wants to start us off?
I'll jump in, even though I'm not a panelist. I just want to say something about the importance, and this goes back to something we did cover as far as identifying and discerning where community is occurring for you. I think it's very important that this person is identifying their immigrant experience as something that contributes to them feeling disconnected. And that's why we look for connection at the intersections, right? So it might be empowering to take the caregiver support story into environments where maybe the main focus is your experience from an immigrant community, or the type of work that you do, or the fact that you see yourself or that you perform in a particular role for your family, that you are a financial caregiver, that you provide the housing. When you find those things in common, that might be the starter point for the community that can help you. And now I'll hand it over to the panel.
Yes, I would love to piggyback on that. My parents are both immigrants, and I I'm an immigrant's daughter, and I can't relate exactly to being an immigrant myself. But when I first started with my mom's caregiving, I had zero support because of all the limited beliefs. Our whole entire family, my mom's mother, aunts, everyone was against not wanting to know anything about my mom's illness. So when I started seeking help, I leaned to NAMI. NAMI actually has Spanish programs, and if you're not able to go anywhere, you can do it virtually. There was a time where we couldn't leave our house because my mother needed 24-hour care. So my father and I would literally join virtually. And now we're still on the NAMI calls just because we do need support. And it's always nice to have support from someone that really understands the cultural barriers that we go through. And through that same NAMI program, they offer like mindfulness, like breathing exercise, and just like different meditation techniques that can help through your journey as well.
Yeah, I'd only add one other thing, because I also work full time. When Tim was younger, I did work in an office, and I was asked by my HR at one point to share my story about Tim at an event. It was a small event. And I did, and it was amazing how much support I got. And people in my own that I worked with every day, that I saw every day, that would come to me and say, I also have a brother with schizophrenia, or my sister has bipolar disorder, or my mom has severe depression. And we became our own community. So it's amazing how sharing your story, even though I know it can be hard, Maria, I get it. I'm the daughter of an immigrant as well. It can be very difficult. My dad's from South America. It's very difficult to get to get through cultural barriers. But sharing my story, I found, has found me the most community and support.
Great.
Yeah, I think that's so lovely. And that ties in to the earlier conversation that Amira and Sarah had about the power of storytelling and representation in those stories as well. Especially when we're talking about marginalized communities. I think that's really a powerful piece. So I thank you for speaking on that. I'm now going to do a little bit of an expert move and combine two questions. One is, and this was, elements of this have already been breached or talked about here in the conversation, so I think it's fitting to combine them. One, starting off, is picking battles. When you are caring for someone, there's always going to be those moments of butting heads, right? Where you're not seeing eye to eye, and there's a little bit of disconnect. How do you pick the battles, or, I think to use the phrase, the hills to die on, in those moments? So maybe your loved one isn't receptive to going to a doctor's appointment or a dentist appointment. How do you find that give and take? And then how do you approach trust after that? Because those can be instances where trust can feel compromised on your loved one's part. Does anyone want to speak to that? I know that, Brianna, you spoke a little bit about that in your story, so maybe you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I would say like picking and choosing battles, like just for example, depends on what it is, of course. Like my brother had to get blood work as he's on clozapine, and that was like a non-negotiable. I was seeing side effects, I was worried. So it took a lot of encouragement. It took a few hours to get out of the house, but we did it. And I followed it up with like something fun. We went to like his favorite smoothie shop and we just sat in the car and drank our smoothies. Like if it's a dentist appointment or if it's something that could be put on the back burner, like my wedding's coming up and we've been trying to get a suit for him for months. We finally did, but like that's a back burner thing. Like if he is not in the mood to go out, I am not forcing him out of the house to go try on suits. It really just depends. I think medication is where I used to walk on eggshells a lot, and it's kind of interesting. I kind of had the opposite experience of Krissa because he is still on a long-acting injectable, but that's when I never talked about medication. Like, and that's kind of similar to your story, but now that he's on long-acting injectable and the clozapine, it kind of broke that barrier where it was like an unspoken subject, like of him taking medication. And he's comfortable with me now taking that, or not taking that, knowing that and talking about it with him. So I think just giving him encouragement. I always tell him I'm proud of him. That builds our trust back up. And I also ask him how he's feeling every day. I'll apologize if I think I'm in the wrong or I put him in an uncomfortable situation. Just recognizing his feelings, I think, always brings us back to us.
Yeah, no, I think that that's great. And especially, I think, speaking to making those hard decisions sometimes when it comes to our loved ones and being able to, I think, again, always come back to that, the elements of shared decision making as appropriate, but also, just letting our loved ones know that we're on their side and we want to listen. And we want to work with them. We want to make decisions with them. So I love that. Anyone else have anything that they would want to add before I go to the last question that I have seen come through kind of our Q&A section here?
I'd like to add to that.
Sure.
So there's something that we do with my mom as well. We actually make her stand in front of a mirror and say affirmations, like say, I can do hard things. I am beautiful. I'm strong. And in the beginning, she didn't want to do it. She would get really upset, but now it's almost like it's a routine. So when we have, doctor's appointments, which she hates going to the doctor because she's been held on 5150, so it's very traumatic for her. It's something that it's really hard for us to do, but we set it up where all of us in the family, we kind of know it's going to be a hard day. So we know not to, say anything negative in the morning or nothing that's going to trigger her or anything. We're like on her side, whatever she wants, maybe make her favorite breakfast. And then her affirmations are said in the morning and we're on our way there. We play like meditation music for her. And another thing that we do is she loves shopping. She loves, wearing new clothes. So we'll take her shopping after her doctor's appointment and let her know, that we don't mind, going shopping after. She deserves it. And it's something that always inspires her and wants to work with it. So just finding what they love has been key for my mom because she does not believe she's sick. She struggles with the anosmia as well. So it's hard for her to, go in and get checked and know that she has an illness because she doesn't believe it. So we'll have to tell her that we're just, getting the routine that she needs every month as part of being a woman or things along those lines. For us, she doesn't speak the language, so she can't really talk to the doctor. So it's something that's how we navigate it. So just finding, what they like and, making them feel like we're a part of her team and not, against her.
Great.
And can I add one point to that? Because I love that. It reminds me of something. There was a book I read years ago by a person named Dr. Ross Green, and he talks about an empathy-driven process to engage with someone who's struggling with their emotions or struggling with the situation. And so what Maria is doing is this beautiful application of that and allowing her mother to come into the space. And that's a lot of what I've done with my own kiddo, Nicole, to your point about going to the dentist or going to the doctor, whatever, and how do you make that happen? And so it's partially the trust conversation, but it's also the empathy-driven conversation, understanding where they're at and understanding how to have that conversation so they're brought into the fold of thinking about it. It's like how Brianna's doing with her brother when it comes to the suit for her wedding. I think a lot of this all kind of, comes together. And it can't be this is the way it's going to be, or else it's never going to be. And so anyways, I just thought it was a beautiful application of it. So
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, I know that we are getting close to time. The last question that I have is purely about resources. And again, I'm combining two questions. One is about incarcerated individuals that have a diagnosis of schizophrenia. We know that there is a high level of impact there, knowing that we have many of our friends from various mental health organizations also here who have joined us today in the chat if they can share resources. But of course, if the panelists have anything that comes to mind that you come across, if you want to speak to anything, that would be great. But also, caregivers with disabilities. Maybe it's a mental health diagnosis, a physical disability. This really speaks to me as a caregiver that's disabled. What resources or additional tools might be out there to support those family caregivers?
Can I pivot that question to Christy? In case there was resources that cross your desk with your work with NAMI?
Yeah, I think as a caregiver, sometimes it's very hard to say across the board an organization, just one organization. I know a lot of times we have problems with people that may not have access to certain organizations or they're just not availability there. So I would say as a caregiver, it's all about community, and community doesn't mean that it has to be right beside you. So there are a lot of virtual options with national organizations. If you can't get plugged into someone within your local community, then certainly start, searching on Google and finding a national organization that can definitely have like a virtual support group or something of that nature. But I think when it comes to caregiving and serious mental illness, community is going to be everything, because a lot of times we're able to plug in to those areas and we're able to get some relief and just understanding that we're not alone.
Right, absolutely. So if I could step in here, because I think this is a great segue to resources. I just want to make sure that we're mindful of time because we have taken it all the way down to the last 5 minutes. Nicole, thank you for moderating and facilitating the Q&A section. I invite all of our audience to email us at info@caregiveraction.org with any remaining questions that you have. We'll also be reviewing the chat for those questions that we can create statements behind and maybe post with the webinar or put on one of our landing pages. So we thank you for all the information in this very rich chat and in the Q&A. But I want to make sure that we do take the time to highlight, and we can field your questions via email at info@caregiveraction.org. It's been plugged into the chat. I just want to say thank you again to our whole entire panel, and want to make sure that we share with our audience the works that have been created by our panelists in their capacities as authors. So the first one is No One Gets to Fall Apart, which is by Sarah Labrie. And you can find this book on Amazon. The link is here, and this deck will be also posted for your use. And we're also going to put the link in the chat. We appreciate you, Sarah, for sharing your story, and do hope that people who it resonates with are able to connect with your work. It's very, very groundbreaking. Next slide. Our next author is actually Nicole Gillen, who has written 2 books on schizophrenia and related disorders and mental health care. The first one is Connected Care, Practical Guide to Technology for Serious Mental Illness. And the second one is Schizophrenia and Related Disorders, a Handbook for Caregivers, both of which are available on Amazon. The links have been placed in the chat for your use. And finally, we have our gratitude journal by Ms. Maria Case, the Compassion Gratitude Journal. And to her point about resources not existing and this being a ripe ground for creation, I think this is an awesome addition to what we're connecting the audience to as far as what has been created by our panelists, because this is really getting at the heart of the self-care and the affirmations and just maintaining a positive mindset throughout your caregiving journey. It's available in both English and Spanish. And if you use the code caregiver, you'll receive 20% off of your purchase. So Maria, thank you for sharing that with us and making that available to our audience. Next slide, please. Caregiver Action Network maintains a host of supports for caregivers, and we just wanted to highlight some of the assets that are currently on our website for your use. This asset, Navigating HIPAA as a Family Caregiver, Supporting a Loved One with Schizophrenia, is currently housed on our site, and the link has been placed in the chat for you. Please bookmark it and return to it so that you can really gather what information you need from it. Next slide. We also have a blueprint for families of loved ones with mental health issues. It's also been placed in the chat for your use. And again, we hope that these types of materials help either spur conversations or more securely connect you to resources in your community that can become a part of your caregiver support plan or your care plan. Next slide, please. And we also have our National Caregiver Help Desk. Caregiving doesn't come with a manual, but it does come with help. Our help desk is not only reachable by phone at 855-227-3640, but we also have the connection to an app. So if you go to our website, it will pop up where you can connect to the app, and you can connect to our Caregiver Help Desk. It is not fully 24 hours, but it is available for you to ask questions, to receive support in high pressure moments, high pressure, non-emergency medical moments, and just hopefully help support and pivot you to the resources that are locally and easily available for you as you continue to round out what your caregiver support plan looks like. Next slide, please. And we thank you for staying on for a few extra minutes. If you have any extra questions that you would like to plug into the chat at this time, we'll answer them offline, or you can email us at info at caregiveraction.org. Next slide, please. Finally, we invite you to stay connected. You can subscribe to our Take Care newsletter. You can also subscribe for alerts for various programming and outreach, roundtables, webinars that we'll be doing in the future. Please take note of our website, www.caregiveraction.org. The phone number to our help desk is also listed here, 855-227-3640. And also our info which is our main incoming email address, which is info at caregiveraction.org. What follows are our social media handles. You can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and YouTube. Look at me. I know all of the social media handles. And we maintain community there as well as post micro learnings. We also post various insight questions and connect you to our current slate of activities and even activities of some of our coalition partners, our patient advocacy group partners, and some of our funding partners. So please be sure to connect with us on social media or in any of the ways that I have described. Thank you for the 3 minutes over. I appreciate everyone's attendance and everyone's participation. A special thank you to our caregivers who participated on today's panel: Brianna, Maria, Christy Stonehill, Krista Hickey. We've also had Sarah Labrie as well as Nicole Gillen, who had to leave us promptly at 4. And to my entire Caregiver Action Network work team, thank you so much for your support and your excellence and your professionalism in the execution of this event. Everyone have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.